Shit's about to.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Unwracked podcast. I'm Andrew Barry, your host, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Phil Viz and Kyle Wilkes. Guys, how we doing today?
Doing all right over here.
Cool.
Doing wonderful.
All right, so for the lineup today, we're going to give you a rundown of what we saw today from the EmPro. We're going to give you our predictions for the upcoming Dubai Pro, a really good show over in the Middle East. Then we're going to go over a couple user questions and, see where the conversation takes us. Phil, what did you see with the EmPro today?
Well, it was pretty much between two guys, right? So Sas was obviously the front runner, and then Calderon, which is a 212 Olympian, jumped into the open. So I wasn't really expecting that because I believe he's going to be back down to 212 for Dubai. So I guess
That's
he
what I
wanted
read.
to test the waters and open. He's real thick. He's really good. Looking at these pictures on the screen, I saw some sharper ones, which showed a little bit more of an advantage leaning towards Sas. But I thought Sas looked phenomenal. So there's a few individual pictures of Sas that are a little clearer that really show. I think he was better than last week. So
What do you think, Kyle?
I think definitely between these two, right? As far as him jumping in up from 212, I think the reality is the prize money's there, right? There aren't a lot of people doing it, so that's a quick way to make a buck there. And he looks the part. Though I do agree he'll probably stay in 212. That's where he would excel and have the best shot. For another peak for Sas, it seems like he's got it down pretty well at this point. I think he arguably this is one of his better looks. I would really have to see side by sides from all 5 shows he did so far. 6? I don't even know at this point.
I think this is 5.
Yeah, so
I mean,
he's doing pretty good. I hope he shuts it down and recoups for the Olympia.
I got kind of a different take. While I thought this was one of Sasan's better looks, I actually really liked Angel in the show. And considering, as Phil mentioned, he's a 212 guy, I'm looking at some of these pictures and I'm like, Angel looks like the bigger athlete in a lot of ways. I mean, like his pecs and his side shot are just friggin' massive. His hamstring drop. I don't know if Sasan had really opened up his back properly in the shot. I tried to scan through the video and try to find a few instances where he did open up. This was the most he opened up, at least in this head-to-head comparison. But I really like the width that Angel dropped here. And I got some other pics as well. See what you guys think.
I think Sas was more dominant from the front, especially with the quads and showing off the conditioning. So there's some individual pictures that I sent you of Sas that'll show a little bit more of the story than this will. But as you can see, Angel's shorter. He's got a little bit wider waist. His legs are, I would say substantially smaller, to be perfectly honest. So I think Sas pretty much, shut the door from the front. It was closer from the side than the back, but at no point was Angel able to make up ground on that.
Yeah, these are those front shots. I didn't like them necessarily because there was just him standalone. I wanted to see the comparison shots of these guys.
I
next to each
screenshotted
other.
these because they were sharp and you were actually able to see, what's going on there.
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of good head-to-head comparison pictures because I scoured all the sites and this was all we could come up with.
It wasn't a very
really.
deep show. I think there was only like 4 or 5 people or something like that. So, there probably wasn't a lot of comparisons that happened.
Yeah, let me check. Let me get this. This is your top 5 right here. So obviously Sasan, Angel number 2, Justin Maziol. I guess he's a up and comer, doing pretty well over there in Europe. He's done well in a few shows before. 4th place was Brian Drago. He had just won his pro card last year, I think in like late 2024. And then the last guy, Antoine Loth, this is his open debut. I think he turned pro in Classic, I believe.
I used to coach
He's coached
him.
by my friend Martin Winston. He's I don't know if you guys know Martin at all. He's a really good coach over there.
I actually used to coach him, and we did really well, and then he just disappeared on me.
Oh, one of those. What one of those things where you sent a check in and then next thing you know, like there's just
I mean,
no.
it was a while ago. It was probably 2018, 2019, something like that, maybe even 2020, but long ago enough to where I don't really remember exactly what happened. I just remember that things were going good, and then he disappeared.
Yeah, that's rough. I think we lost Kyle there for a
But he
second.
looks great. I mean, it looks like he kept with it. It looks like he's made substantial improvements. So
When you had him, was he what division was he in?
I think he was a light heavyweight when I had him. He was under 200, and then
Okay.
we had to build up, and we were working on that, and then I lost touch with him. Honestly, didn't really follow his career that much, and then I saw him pop up doing well in a pro show. I was like, oh, good for him.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. All right, then let's move on. Let's talk about the Dubai Pro. This one, let's put up the prize money. I think this is important to share because it's really nice to see. We saw the Arnold's giving away, I believe, what they say, 750,000 or something like that.
You hear the guys talk all the time about prize money. I can't believe that this show's not deeper.
Yeah, I mean, we know the top 4 or 5 guys off the top of our head, but after that, it's not like you would have thought that this would have brought close to an Olympia lineup, or at least an Arnold Classic lineup for guys trying to get this money.
I mean, there's even some open guys that like really focus on the prize money and they're not showing up. So I really don't understand why. But the classic money is pretty high. Even the 212 and the men's physique money is pretty high. Compared to other shows. So there's a chance to make a pretty penny here.
What do you guys think? Like, why wouldn't a guy like Hottie, obviously he's perennially just trying to get that Olympia back, but why wouldn't a guy like Hottie, get in shape and come and try to win a quick 150K? It's almost in his backyard.
He's treated like a celebrity back home. He's probably got so much money and probably doesn't even pay. He probably walks into a car dealership and like, I want that, and they're like, here, take it. Like he's a celebrity back home. He probably doesn't pay for anything. He probably makes a ton of money. He probably doesn't need this money.
To that point, actually, I was talking to Kamal, and Kamal told me as an amateur he won a vehicle. He said he won more money as an amateur than he did as a pro. Because over there, they give their amateurs like $10,000
They take
for
care
winning
of
first
them.
place.
Yeah.
They take care of you in bodybuilding. NPC has a lock, on it over here, and I mean, they treat their athletes okay, but no one's walking home with a car or $5,000 at the end of a hard prep.
Now you see some of those guys over there wearing like a $50,000-$100,000 watch. Somebody bought that for them.
Yeah.
They just get handed things, but because they're like the heroes over there. They came to the United States and succeeded and defeated all the Americans. I don't know what it is, but I wish the athletes got even a smidge of that here.
Yeah. Kyle, who do you like for? I mean, I'm going to put up some of our top guys that we know doing the show. Beirut, Edward, I don't know how to pronounce it. Cargbo, I believe. I don't want to botch it. Tonio Burton, Nathan Diasha. Who do you like out of this lineup?
Who else do we have? We have these 4.
We have these 4, and then it's kind of hard to figure out because the list will come out tomorrow, if not Tuesday. Say what?
Ponak?
I don't know. Is he doing it?
No, I didn't see anything on Bonak. These are
Yeah.
the 4 best guys that I was able to confirm are doing the show.
And I heard that Bonak was shutting it down after the last show for until the Olympia. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go Cargbo, or Edwards, probably easier to say, but he impresses me, right? I haven't really seen too much about him, at least this shot here, obviously, these are everyone's most musculars. I think Nathan his proportions are always on point, whether or not he can kind of regain the form he once had, to be determined. And then Tonio's pretty consistent, so I'll give Tonio that. He always shows up in shape, hard as nails. So I think it's he's always in the top 3 minimum, I'd say for sure.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Phil?
I mean, when I saw Edward, I sent you pictures of that. I was like, this guy is crazy. I was like, if everybody else is not on, or even if they are on, this guy's got a shot. But what I really love about this lineup is if you look at these guys, they're all shape guys. They carry mass. They all are in condition, but they all have shape. And I think all of us really favor shape. So these are all shape guys, which is phenomenal. If you look at the back shots, I think that you can see where there's going to be a little bit of a gap. Diash's back looks a little bit smaller than usual. Tonio's back is, balanced. He's got amazing flow and aesthetics and symmetry and everything like that. So I think his back fits his body, but it doesn't really jump off. Whereas the other 2 are going to be dominant as far as, how thick the back musculature is. And honestly, Edward looks the hardest in this lineup that I'm looking at right now. You know, so of everybody that I've seen pictures of, you know, progress pictures, I would say Edward's going to be the hardest and Diash is the second. But again, that's just a week out. You know, it doesn't include peaking.
I think Beirut is going to show up just as hard as anybody in the show. Like that's his MO.
He usually does.
I don't think this. What's that?
He usually does.
Yeah, I mean, like I've never been disappointed in his conditioning once. Edward, I'm actually really impressed with his conditioning because I felt in the past it was slightly lacking. So I think he's coached by Patrick Tour. Is that correct?
I couldn't figure out who his coach was. He didn't tag anybody.
I thought it was Patrick Tour at one point. I think it still is. So, big kudos to them for figuring out his condition because this is, I think, the best I've seen him by far. He's definitely got the wackiest X-frame, I think, up there for any of the athletes. But I think it's going to be a two-man show when it comes down to it between him and Beirut, honestly. Tonio, wacky from the front. From the back, I don't think he's going to be able to hang with these guys. Like, these guys have detail that's popping out. You know, all these guys have stuff, the bells and whistles popping out. Tonio, you know, I know he trained chest this day when we took this picture from his Instagram. Maybe, you know, his back's a little flat compared to his the front of his body. But I just think it's going to be a two-man show between these guys, honestly. If I had money, I'd be betting on Beirut.
I think that Tonio's shape makes him hang with people, you know? Like, it's just the illusion. Because he's probably not going to like me saying this, but I know for a fact that when he won New York, he was under 212.
Yeah.
But he won the Open, and he looked as big as the Open guys, and he always does. So his shape makes him look a heck of a lot bigger than he actually is. So if Tonio is even 220, 222, he's going to look 250. So I think that as long as he's conditioned, he can hang. I think that of these four people, three of them, with the exception of like Diasha being the odd man out, are at their career peaks right now, at the best they've ever been. You know, so we're going to see a real battle here. Now, Diaz is, you know, you can't count him out. He comes in very, very hard. He's got very freaky shape. He compares very well. He's got that waspy tiny waist as long as he can keep the stomach down. Beirut beat him last year in Italy, but it was close.
Yeah. One thing that I don't love about Tonio, and I think he might have fixed it a little bit because I've seen some cool videos, is the turtle shell abdominal distension. You know, I feel like even in the front double, and then he crunches down on it a little bit, it just protrudes even more. Kind of like how Dexter Jackson had that towards the end of his career that really started popping out. He's got it way earlier in his career. I did see some of his standing front relax, and it looks like him and Justin Jacoby, his coach, have figured that out a good deal. One thing I actually want to ask you guys, though, do you like how Nathan Diasha is hitting this rear double? Like, I feel like his knees are bent too much.
He's squatting down too much. For sure.
Yeah, okay. And this wasn't taken mid-video. This was a shot he had posted. So, you know, I tried to go through and find comparable shots for within a certain time frame out. You know, Phil sent me some pictures of Tonio and stage shots, but I was like, I don't think it's fair to use stage shots against the other guys that are, you know, 10 days out.
They're freaky shots, though.
They're great shots, don't get me wrong. But you can check those out on Tonio's page for sure.
I think that Diasha, if he moved his legs a little closer, because I don't want to say his legs are not matching everything else, but they are a little smaller than the rest of them, you know? Especially from the back, they look a little thinner. So if you move that stance in a little bit, it'll look thicker. But the thing that really bothers me about Diasha's back posing is the fact that he doesn't get his hands back. He's very internally rotated, and he's not showing the thickest part of his arms, which is one of his best body parts. Like, why would you not want to present one of the best body parts that you have in the best way? So I never understood why he hit the pose like that.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of a side note, I wanted to share this with you. Phil sent it to me.
Oh my God!
Now this is current, right?
This is like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, or some shit like that.
All right, like this is not for the faint at heart, guys. Like this is some intense, crazy weight.
This guy's going to war. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I was impressed. I thought for a minute this was like an off-season
How
video.
many times
but I'm
did
like,
you
wait
think
a
he was only going to get 2 reps, 3 reps, and he gets like 8?
Yeah,
Just
no,
battling through it, and that's got to feel like hell. That's what's that, 7 plates per side?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, well, Kyle, how do you feel about your athletes training like this heavy leading into a show? Like they're 10 to 12, 15 days out, you know?
I would be, so that can vary, right? Let's just say this gentleman here is a big barbell squatter. I don't know his videos. I've never looked into it, right? So I'm actually intrigued, being that I see him lifting like this. It's pretty impressive. So I'll
Yeah.
go down the rabbit hole later. But if he was someone that always barbell squatting, I'd probably move him to more of a Smith machine. Do I think lifting this heavy, potentially this far out, makes sense? Sometimes no. At this point, obviously, I don't think he lost any strength. I can't imagine how strong the guy is, but I just try to always go to what is safer exercises. Stay away from free weight. A lot of machine work, things like that. No stiff legs. Doesn't seem like he's doing any stiff legs. I'm letting it kind of roll through. But yeah, I think it's a little too heavy, if I'm being honest. But he also got 8 reps. So, if that's what works for him, he also enjoys to train that way. He's bringing the intensity, which, again, is always the most important variable.
One of the things I do typically with a lot of athletes, particularly with leg training, is, and I know Phil probably has some thoughts on this too, is I like your last hard leg day to be at least 14 days before you get on stage. And if we even do your legs, 7 days later, it's probably going to be like a 70 to 80%, leave 3 reps in reserve, in and out of the gym in under an hour. Phil, how do you have your athletes, approach leg training going into that final week? And then talk about the variables of why.
Well, I learned a lot of this stuff, from myself, right? Anecdotally, firsthand real world experience. So I don't know if you remember this, but I think it was like 2014. And for years, I couldn't get my legs to come in on stage. They just would not fill out no matter what I did. And then Scott Stevenson sends me research basically showing me, I was young, that muscle damage will impair, glycogen formation. And I was doing the opposite. We all want to think that we're so tough and we're hardcore. So me being me, oh, well, I'm not weak like everybody else. I can train hard into the show. And that's what was stopping my legs from filling out. My legs started filling out when I would, again, like you said, do my last really hard one, like 16, 14 days out. And then closer to the show was more like leg extensions, leg curls, but no drop sets, supersets. Like I'm just focused on bringing down the inflammation and recovering, but making sure I maintain that mass. So get a stimulus, try to get a little pump, get the heck out of there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. We like to live by the adage of, keep the training in during prep that built the muscle, I think back in the day, a lot of the guys used to switch to what they thought they could shape the muscle and do these high reps and all that kind of stuff. And we know better now, obviously, but I do think there's a point where you need to pull back on that, not just for the legs in general, only the legs, but also for your full nervous system. You're trying to peak the body. You're not trying to run the body into the ground and prove who's the toughest, What are some other things you guys do in particular with legs to help guys bring them into shows?
We forget that we're not rested, we're not sleeping good, we're not fed enough to recover from things like that. But I also will break certain rules. Now I'm noticing that I've noticed this, I've mentioned this a few times. I don't know if it's from me or from other people, but I notice more and more people are starting to pick up on it. Is if I have somebody who really had a tough time making weight or their legs are really flat, 2 days before the show, day before the show, I'll let them do some leg work in the gym. Just to translocate those GLUT4 transporters to the surface and facilitate glycogen storage and things like that. So actually, that wasn't my idea. I picked that up from Chad Nichols. So Chad does that, and some other coaches do that, but I've actually found a lot of success with that. And I notice people will be commenting on the client's legs. They're so full. It's because of that.
Yeah. I did that with Nate Spirit the year Bundy won, so 2020 Nationals, I think. Nick had already just gotten his pro card at North Americans that year, and then Bundy. This was, I think I told you about this before, but Bundy was literally, a one-man walk-off. Steve, after 5 or 6 poses, was like, number 17, you're dismissed, and he's like, what'd I do wrong? He thought he was being disqualified, and Steve's like, no, you're good. Come back tonight.
I think you were texting me when that happened.
Yeah, imagine how that feels walking off one man knowing oh, wow, I just won my class at NPC Nationals. But anyway, got back to the story. After prejudging, I noticed Nate's legs were kind of, they're just looking a little shallow, didn't have enough sweep. So luckily, it was at the gym in Orlando, or the hotel in Orlando, and they had a decent-sized gym. We were able to do some leg extensions, some curls, and sissy squats and stuff, and then feed a big meal afterwards. Because like you're saying, Phil, get nice and insulin sensitive, get those GLUT4 transporters popping, and then load a nice meal in there. And his legs looked a lot fuller at nighttime. So these strategies definitely work. One other thing I want to talk about in terms of leg, we'll call it dead legs leading into a show. you guys ever use Epsom salt baths leading in?
Kyle?
No? I'll take that as a no.
So no, I use it with generally females more so than males. If somebody mentions that their legs feel super heavy as a male, then I'll suggest it, right? But I also try to control it with maybe the type of cardio they're doing, monitor their recovery. So again, I mean, overall consensus here, I think it sounds like we all try to mitigate the amount of volume and soreness that someone's going to experience in that last leg session. Generally, it seems like we're all in agreement that the last hard leg session should be outside of 1 week, before the fourth stage. So just the main takeaway for the viewers. But as far as recovery technique like the Epsom salt baths, I think they have practicality, right? A lot of guys.
At what point in the week would you do it, though?
When will I use it?
I'll do it as many times as every day, even every night.
But like all the way up to the show?
Yeah.
Usually up until maybe Thursday, depending what they're getting into the tan. Let's just say the show.
Yeah, I mean the tan obviously
I
plays a
don't
role.
mess with the tan or anything like that. I want to reduce,
So I wanted to make that. I wanted to ask you guys that because I assumed that was going to be your answer. Because for the listeners, some people might think that you're doing this the day before to dry out, and that's not when you do this. Because what you have to remember is, anytime you do something like an Epsom salt bath or like a sauna session, you're going to raise your aldosterone levels, right? So sometimes in prep, you'll have a client, you'll have a competitor who like just holds a little extra water, and then if you just have like a couple days spike of getting that water out, it doesn't come back. So typically you want to do these things earlier in the week rather than later in the week, because earlier in the week you're still combating that aldosterone by drinking a lot of water, sodium's up, so you're still forcing that aldosterone back down. Whereas if you were to do this the day before the show, probably gonna hold water on stage.
Yeah, we and I think Kyle was also alluding to using more with the female clients because, of course, wellness bikini athletes, they're training legs 3, sometimes 4 days a week, so their lower body's definitely getting a pounding. If you add cardio on top of that, just that sheer repetition and volume definitely warrants extra recovery for that body part for sure.
So for my guys, what I'd like to do is if I have somebody who's like genetically weak in the legs, because that was me, I got my legs very big, but anybody who looks at my pictures, that was not genetic. That was just me busting my butt for a very long time. My legs are not big genetically, and they don't hold. They'll shrink if I missed an ounce of meat in a meal, So what I would do is I would have people do other types of cardio where it involves the upper body, whether it be kettlebell swings or hitting a heavy bag, hitting a speed bag, doing some focus mitt work, battle ropes, jump rope, anything other than loading the legs. So have you guys ever done that with your women when the legs are, really overloaded and beat up?
Not really that stuff. I'll tell you one thing I like to do is actually switch to pool cardio. If someone has access to like Olympic-sized pool, I'd rather them get in and do full body swimming, and in like HIIT in particular. I remember 2015 and 2017, that's all I did for cardio was like 3 to 4 HIIT sessions per week, 15 minutes in duration total. And I think my upper body grew just from kind of moving my arms in different ways that I never did before. And I definitely saved leg size from just not taking that grinding of, 60 minutes a day or sometimes 120 minutes a day of cardio. What do you got, Kyle?
Yeah, I think, the Stairmaster I always look at as the hardest type of cardio you can do in terms of the equipment itself, right?
Yeah.
So that is something depending on the person. I'm not going to have them continually walking up steps for their cardio session, especially if they're not genetically gifted with their legs, or if it's a body part that I know starts to fade depending on how hard we're pushing them. So I'll transition them to the treadmill, something a little easier potentially. In terms of HIIT type sessions, I've used the rower if I'm looking for more detail in the lower back, battle rope, things like that. So plays 2 roles there. One, for rower specifically, I'm driving blood to that lower back region, and then something like the battle ropes or something like that. That's more so, again, keeping the legs out of it. It's HIIT, gets your heart rate up. So instead of doing the spin bike, which is what comes to mind for many people as a really good form of cardio, that you're going to feel on your legs. I don't know if anyone's ever done a spin bike, but if you do it after leg training, for example, that's quite the way to finish the day.
Have you guys ever used?
Remember?
Well, have you guys ever used? Remember, maybe it was like 15 years ago. A lot of guys were using the spin bike on like the hardest setting as like a quad exercise, or
Yeah,
like
I actually was one of the people that popularized that. It's actually in my highlights now on my stories. All of my clients have one hit session in the off season per week, and it's always after legs and it's interval. So what I have them do is crank the resistance, stand up, and grind through those reps like 15, 20 seconds, and then you sit down for 45, and you try to repeat that for 12 to 15 minutes. Usually you don't get through the first session because it's really brutally hard and your quads are so pumped you can't bend your knees. But it's a great quad finisher, and it's great for conditioning, and it'll send your metabolism through the roof.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool. All right, let's get to the main topic for today. This one really, I think, is relevant to Kyle because he's had this situation recently, but peaking an athlete 2 weeks in a row. So for an example, Nick Walker did the Pittsburgh where he was the people's champ, and then he did the New York where he was the actual champ. Take us through your approach, take us through your mindset. Was it different for him than it was for, say, an average amateur or, just a regular person versus, because Nick carries a lot of tissue, a lot of muscle. Just walk us through what you did, how'd that went.
Yeah, so without going deep dive, we could save that for maybe an episode with Nick, or just an episode specifically on peaking. Someone with that much tissue, the approach is obviously different. Generally, if someone is an amateur, based on the weeks leading up, I gather a lot of data. I'm very analytical when it comes to things. So the way I'm setting up diets, Friday, Saturday, I'm taking a look at them Friday, depending on what I'm giving them, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and playing to what weight is the best, where I need them to be. So going into this first show with Nick, obviously I've never had any experience prior with Nick specifically. So from a water retention standpoint, how much water he drops, the way I go about things, I will say requires minimal diuretic usage, which is where I think it's always a safe win in my book, which is why I think a lot of my peaks are generally, even on my worst peak, they're probably some people's best peaks because I'm not having to play chemical warfare. I think after that first peak, most people, no matter what, that second peak's always easier. I feel people are always 5-10% better. Now the approach, obviously depending on what they're eating, let's just say in that first show leading up or post-show, people have a victory meal or people's champ meal, we'll call it. With what he was eating, he was only getting better, right? So his body really, his metabolism was revving. So his food going to that second week, I didn't really have to keep it as low Monday, Tuesday. I was feeding him earlier. I also gathered data of where I wanted him to be, and I wanted to start it a little earlier. As far as the biggest concern generally from week 1 to week 2 is when you start to use diuretics. Some people are using aldactone, right? Which I'm not too much of a fan of, to say the least, but I've used it in the past. Some people use Boomex, things like that. But any type of diuretic usage, or depending on how you are loading water, or some people reverse load to where they do 3 gallons the week before and they slowly taper it down, you're going to have an issue to where your body generally is going to hold a lot of water. And then psychologically, you have to consider the person, what they're thinking, right? Especially if someone at Nick's level, that was one of the biggest challenges, right? Was just to make sure that he stays confident, especially leading up. And he can tell you himself firsthand, even his mother was worried, we'll say, going into Pittsburgh, right? Based on what she saw Friday evening. She was super worried. So I'll save that for another story. It'll be a very fascinating one. But it was a totally different approach. So Nick is a seasoned veteran, I'd say. And the way he's always prepped was a certain way, because he's always worked with one coach, right? We all have our certain methods, but some of them are quite different. And that was my approach going with Nick, was more so based on data. I know what weight you are, this is what I can predict that you'll be pretty much based on what I'm feeding you, how you're drinking. But the biggest change from a food standpoint going to that second show, usually ITMG is full. It's not as depleted, unless for some reason you had to push conditioning going into that second show, which then food is going to be probably pretty low, Monday to Wednesday at least. In Nick's case, I didn't have to load him with as much fats going into that second show. And it was more of the more food I was giving him, the harder, drier he was getting. So by Tuesday of that second peak, I was like, hey man, we're just going to stage today. Like we're good. I just have to hold you here pretty much. I don't need you to get better. So I think that was the most important takeaway, is the fact that what you do from that first week going into the second week isn't exactly the same, because depending on the person and how you manipulated their water, if you played with sodium a ton, these are all things that I have my own formula, I guess you could say, for. So I kind of know the person's response,
I have a question. I have a question that the viewers would probably love to hear. Is there anything that you had a preconceived notion or idea or assumption of about Nick that when you got into the peak, you were like, wait a minute, that's not how this is. Let's flip the switch. And you're like, okay, because obviously you made both of the peaks work. They were bang on. But did you encounter anything where you thought it was going to be one way and then you realized, oh, well, it's this way? It's something you learned about him.
Just more so with water. I can keep it much higher with him than I even thought. And he was already drinking more water than he would kind of look at me when I told him to drink more. He's just like, this is too much. And I said, Nick, just shut the fuck up.
Isn't that funny
You're
when
on
like you
point.
get an athlete?
But again, you have a person that it's been no different. I've been in the athlete's shoes as well, to where I'm just like, are you sure this is kind of what I should do? So in that regard, it's a totally different approach. Huge show, career-changing show, potentially, right? If he didn't do very well at that show, I don't know. We would have a problem, right, with where Nick is actually going. So that was, I guess, the one thing to focus on for me. It was just, okay, some people, when I start to really control the water, they're dropping too fast, or they just don't have the right look despite me giving the food. Whereas in the past, because again, you got to remember, Nick was living with me for 3 straight weeks going in. So I saw him every single morning. So I had an idea of, how are you drinking your water? Some people drink all their water with meals and then do shit in between meals. Other people drink all their water in between meals and not with the meal. So just having all this timing down, now that I'm controlling it, was the biggest takeaway, I'd say, of where I kind of learned. But I'm trying to think of anything that came to mind, to your point, Phil, of, oh shit, I learned. It was just more so I could feed
I think
heavier.
this is a phenomenal example, though, of paying attention and collecting data. It's trusting what you see and collecting the data on what's going on, rather than this is what the science says, the formula goes this way, so we have to do this. No, pay attention. And that's, like I said, one of my past apprentices that I've had, wasn't the most scientifically educated initially. He is now, but he wasn't. And I'm like, why is this person such a good coach still? And then I realized, hyper attentive. I could ask for any detail from any point, any week, any hour of the day, and boom, he's got it. So I'm like, all right, so really paying attention. So for all you coaches out there, paying attention sometimes is going to trump education.
Yeah. And for me, I don't know, Andrew, maybe you have a different output or answer rather, but I always like to use this scale as a tool, and I use it consistently throughout prep. So sometimes when people are, I get the question all the time. I'm sure you do too, Andrew and Phil. What do I pack for peak week or something? Obviously, again, this is not Nick's case. He's experienced, to say the least, but more so in amateurs. I'm like, hey, bring your scale, both food and weight scale. And and I can't tell how many people forget the weight scale. And I'm just like, now I'm
all
going
the
off.
time.
But the reality is the look, usually you're in a hotel, the pictures are different now. So there's a lot of things that play in a role, but at least I know, based on the look, I know what the purchase price should be. But let's just say if you are playing with diuretics, which a lot of people like to play with diuretics for whatever reason, that can totally change the look. I had 3 clients in Pittsburgh Pro, but the other client I had, Vincenzo, right, I started working with pretty much 6 weeks out. I didn't have a lot of time to gather data, and I kind of listened to previous approaches and had that data to go off of what he used diuretic wise, and I used the littlest bit, and the dude lost 17 pounds overnight, right? That wasn't planned. So I learned moving forward, hey, we're not doing that shit. And then at New York, he was much heavier, but again, in my head, it was just, you've always used it in the past, okay, like, let me try to do a little different approach. But
Well, sometimes you got to do that as a coach. If you have literally no experience and you jump in at the end, you kind of have to say, okay, what do you think has worked for you, and then put your own spin on it and observe, and then make changes for the next one. Yeah. And like you said, yeah, we don't need to use that much, dude. Like whoever was coaching you before might have been overdoing it. No offense.
I think, I very rarely depend on needing diuretics. Usually if I need diuretics, it's because there's some other issues going on, and I either fucked up or that person was doing some other shit on the side.
Yeah.
But if I can have you drinking more water the entire time the night of, cool. I've had people drink a gallon after I started controlling it. They got up to another gallon, right?
Yep.
So I think that's the one takeaway for anyone that's getting into coaching or an athlete that coaches themselves. You don't have to restrict water. And the more you do, and you do that reverse water loading, which for some coaches, that's the approach they like, I just think it's a recipe for disaster, because your body needs water. That's how you're going to shut off carbohydrates to fill out. So when you don't have any water, that's why in the morning, a tip for many people, I will give you an Easter egg of how I do things. I have you pose usually 2 rounds in the morning and give me your weight. Then the first thing I do isn't, hey, what am I eating, Kyle? It's, here's some fluids, right? Could be 12 ounces, 20, 24 ounces. Wait 15 minutes. Pose 2 rounds again. Give me your weight and pictures again. Now I know, hey, this motherfucker's flat. Or, hey, you're good. Your fat ass isn't eating, actually. We're going to chill for a couple hours, you know?
That's exactly what I do. I will add water 6 ounces at a time. If they keep getting better, I'll do it over and over and over and I'll keep going. And they won't eat an ounce of food until I add water and I don't see a change. If I continue to see a change, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again.
For the listeners, what's the time frame? Because like I tell people, like, okay, I want you to go and drink, 400 mLs of water, and then I want pictures in 20 minutes. What do you guys do time frame in that situation? Like when they wake up, you get the first pics. Do you say 20 minutes? Do you say 30? What do you tell them?
Well, I can tell you that I'll give my morning protocol right here. I have everybody do espresso in the morning. So that's going to be some of their fluid. But what that's also going to do is help them go to the bathroom if they have to go to the bathroom. So my protocol is you wake up, you take a piss, you pose 2 rounds, because this is a mistake that a lot of people make, is they send pictures cold to their coaches. And that's not your true look. You've got to get blood flowing. So they pose 2 rounds, rest a minute. On the 3rd round, they send me pictures, and then I tell them, don't wait for my reply, go drink the coffee. Right away, get that down. And then 20, 30 minutes goes by, I want you to, again, pose 2 rounds, rest a minute, then pose and take pictures, send me pictures. And I'll do that every 15, 20 minutes for as long as I have to. If they keep getting better, I will keep doing it over and over and over. And I've given people, God, I probably have given people 2 liters on show day, maybe more.
Yeah. One thing that popped up in my head was from Nick going from week 1 to 2. How much do you think he didn't get the result he wanted? Like, obviously we know that, but do you think it played a role of everyone reaching out to him, and not just like the, hey man, you looked amazing, but like, no, we really had you winning this. We think you got robbed. Do you think that gave him a boost of confidence and kind of lowered his cortisol? Because as you said, he showed up the way that everyone was expected him or wanted to see him look. And if it would have gone a different way, his career is looking like a different trajectory at that point, right? Like it's not Nick talking about, us talking about Nick being a contender for the O. It's Nick's got to figure out his shit. Now, do you think he got a boost of confidence just, even though he got he got second, do you think he got a boost of confidence from all the love he received?
In regards to just general overall mental fortitude that comes with that loss, I think it was really good for him and for his career. Just like I had mentioned, I think previously in our last podcast with him losing at USA's when he was favored to go in back in 2019.
Yep.
He got second. He was shell-shocked. Arguably, it was a similar situation back then, right? You'd have to really pull up pictures and really deep dive, but I'm pretty sure, if I recall, I was obviously biased. I was there, but I had him winning, and that changed who he was. He went back to the drawing boards, and he was hungrier than ever. I think the confidence he got from people reaching out saying, hey, I had you winning, I mean, the messages were, I couldn't tell you how many were coming through. Yeah. People they were coming from, especially, is what's always more important, the quality, I'll say, not the quantity. I think that helped his confidence tremendously. Do I think it altered how the peak would be set up or his body? No, and that's simply because you see how I came out in Pittsburgh. If anything, the stress would have been mega high going into that. So it wasn't like he was slightly off and then the stress was off and he got better. Now, after New York, when he finally qualified and won, as people see now with his reverse, that first 2 weeks, you saw how much better he was actually getting lower, despite food going up, because the stress, you have certain, for me, again, I pull out compounds most of the time, right? I don't really give a fuck what level you're at. I want to make sure you're healthy and responsive. So he had no stress from any burners or anymore. His cardio was much lower. He won, right? Kind of take a deep breath now. We have 20 weeks to kind of regain the traction we need, get back to where we need to be for the Olympia. But he continuously got better after that. So I think that's when the stress came off, because the reality is we didn't know who was doing New York. For all we know, Martin was going to hop in, and Martin missed the mark, I'd say, at Pittsburgh. But Martin, if he's on, Martin could be competitive, so it wasn't an easy walk in the park. Do I think Nick can take him? Yes, right? But at the same time, he's not someone to take lightly, neither is Bonac. So if Nick came in awful, he wouldn't have won at New York, and then we have a really fucking big problem.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
One other point I wanted to touch on, because me and Phil were just having this text message back and forth last week about diuretics and Diazide in general. And I think back, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was common just to give a guy a 25 milligram Diazide before bed, maybe even a burger and fries, give him a Diazide, no water, and then we'll check in the morning and kind of like throw a Hail Mary and say a prayer, like, hope this guy wakes up looking better than And now the conversation went like, oh, dude, then I went through, not even 12 and a half. And then it was like, I'm having people do 6.25. Now we're down to like 3.125 milligrams microdosing. Do you guys take a similar approach? I know Phil does, but Kyle, how do you take a similar approach with that sometimes?
So usually what I do, I take Little Debbie muffins and I take a full Diazide, and that's your last meal. Jokes aside, okay, I microdose Diazide. I never would use more than a quarter at a time because there's no reason it compounds. And the only thing to fix when you have too much diuretic in your body, the only thing that's going to fix that is time. There's not shit you can do about it. So I've had somebody accidentally in the past take more than they're supposed to. And it's just like, okay, let me try to get this motherfucker hydrating because I know what's going to happen if he doesn't. But yeah, microdosing is always the safest. Again, set things up to be safe so that you can control variables the best you can. If you need a diuretic, which I think 90% of people don't, they're just fat and they think they have water. It's fat. It's not going anywhere overnight. Use it in a strategic, intelligent way.
I'm always blown away when I see some of these, we'll say, well-known coaches' plans with like 50 to 100 milligrams of HCTZ throughout the day, and I'm like, why? Like, what are you seeing that like maybe we wouldn't see, and like why? And my thinking is that these guys end up looking good on stage despite what you're doing, not because of what you're doing. They're just that good genetically. Well, would you guys agree? Or
I think that a lot of like top coaches, because I've been around in this for a long time, and I've had a reasonable position to where people talk to me and tell me things. So I've seen almost everything that everybody does, and that's what I call the kitchen sink method. So what they're doing is they're hitting them with the diuretic. Oh crap, they're flat. Let's take some insulin. Okay, now they're holding water. Now the diuretic. Oh crap, now they're flat again. Now insulin again. And they go back and forth. I have a peek from a well-known coach who won nationals. If he's watching this, he probably knows I'm referring to him, but I'm not going to give a name. But I have his peak. And it was literally Demodex, 10 IUs of insulin and cake. Demodex, 10 IUs of insulin and cake. Demodex, 10 IUs of insulin and cake. And he looked phenomenal on show day, but this is what a lot of them do. Does it work? Yeah, it can work. But it's not the healthiest thing to do, and it's definitely not the safest thing to do. And if that coach that knows how to do it isn't there, you're screwed. So it's not the best way to go about it. Microdosing is going to be the safer way.
But like you're saying, though, the pendulum keeps going back and forth, too flat, too dry, and back and forth. Yeah. So you got to kind of pray that prejudging when your athlete ends up, and at a national show, there's no way to predict exactly what time your athlete's going to be on stage, right? I mean, we've all told our guys, oh, you're going to be on by 9:30. Here we are at 12:30, and they're just warming up and lining up, especially at like North Americans with all the masters classes and whatnot. So I think that's a big risk when you do the kitchen sink approach, throwing a Hail Mary. When you hit it, I guess it looks pretty good, but if you miss, then, it's on you. But let's move into questions.
Andrew, for you.
This one, let me put it up on the screen. This one's for Kyle, and it's from J Crush Fitness. This is coming from our YouTube. Guys, thank you for sending us questions. We had a lot of great comments on the previous episode. Keep them coming. Like, subscribe, and share. If you got a bodybuilding friend or someone in the industry, send it to them, tag them in it. The more people we get, the more good information we can bring you guys. But this question is for Kyle. I know he gives high-carb days on bigger workout days. Why is it ideal to put the high-carb days on the day of the workout and not the day before? Doesn't it take time for those carbs to be put to use by the muscle? Would that change depending on the time of day that they work out?
You can hear me first and foremost, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So great question. I get it often. Things to consider. Is the person in off-season? Are they in prep? Okay. Why are they getting higher food? Is it to aid performance? Is it to fill them out? These are things they consider. So knowing what the person's training, time of day could play a role depending, again, if I was trying to do it more so to fill a body part out, perhaps the night before. If I know they're training in the morning, for example, I'm going to probably feed them a little heavier before bed so that they're kind of loaded to go in for that workout. If it's just simply to keep their body and the metabolic rate high, I don't really care what they're training. I just have it strategically set up to where, hey, you eventually be on Saturday. This is where I'm collecting data. This is what we're doing every Saturday, for example. In a perfect world, I would use Friday, Saturday, Sunday as like test. And then I would dig, push, whatever term you want to call it, from a base diet standpoint from Sunday to Thursday, and then kind of cycle through it that way. So I think that's one thing to consider. I've used higher carb days in both fashions as a refeed, but generally when people speak refeed, always consider what is the primary objective. Is it to just aid the workout? Is it to actually see if the person's filling out? Sometimes it's just mental sanity. Person's really hungry all the time and they're just bitching. Here's some food. Shut the fuck up.
Go ahead, Andrew. You can add on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, so whenever we get questions like this, and if anyone were to ask me a question, my answer is always like, it depends, because there's a numerous factors. And Kyle started to talk about them in terms of what's our objective with this, right? You know, whether it's a free meal or we're talking about heavy refeeds, maybe I have you on some kind of cycle diet where, you know, it just happened that that higher calorie day fell on a certain body part, a certain training body part, right? Maybe we are structuring it so we're feeding you the day before because, you know, we have data that shows, hey, I have great workouts. Like, let's say your legs are weak, for instance, and we're feeding you up an extra 500 grams of carbs the day before, you know, maybe using some insulin and whatnot. And maybe we're doing even into the first couple meals of the day of training, you know, so you're super high, glycogen loaded. You're going to have a lot of hydrostatic intramuscular pressure. You're going to have better lifts, better training, better stabilization, and you're going to hit new lifts or new weights. So it can drive more muscle growth that way. But again, maybe it's just because I have you on some type of cycle diet, and that's your high day, and then the next 3 days are going to be lower or more moderate days, and those are like your fat loss or your dig days before we fill you back out again. So any of these types of questions, they're so situational and it's so individual that my answer to Joe might be different to Frank based off the variety of factors in terms of working with them.
Yeah, there's gonna be numerous factors on why or when you would do that, right? So typically my plans, I'm always gonna have higher carbs on leg days because you're gonna be burning up more calories, you're gonna require more fuel. But if I'm trying to bring up a specific body part, I will absolutely shift it to that day. I will even go as far in contest prep as to have, say if I'm trying to bring up a body part like their back is weak, I will go into a surplus on that day and then just pull from the other days so I can, you know, accelerate fat loss on those days. But the surplus day also is going to bump the metabolic rate. So like you said, you kind of use it like a carb cycle. But I'm going to throw the listeners a bone here on this one because I don't think I've ever seen this talked about online very much. But you did touch on it just without referring to the electrolytes as far as the intramuscular pressure, you know, volumizing from the glycogen. But what happens is when we eat higher carbs, we're getting higher insulin spikes in the body. When we get higher insulin spikes in the body, you have supraphysiological intracellular concentrations of electrolytes. That's a fancy way of saying you push more sodium and potassium into the muscles, which pulls water in. When there's more water in the muscles, it expands the muscle, makes it tighter, and that's going to give you more leverage. So even if you don't have more, you know, actual contractile fibers and whatnot that are actually, you know, producing the force, you have leverage from, you know, the water. Anybody who's ever done synthol, probably I'm the only one who's going to own up to that. You'll notice after you've done it, you're stronger on those days in those body parts because you've added intramuscular pressure to that body part. So I remember I did my biceps when I was young, and I was in the gym curling like 60s, and people were like, what the hell? But my biceps were all swollen from putting 3 C's of synthol in both of them. So I had that leverage, and my dumbbell curl went up like 10, 15 pounds in a week, you know, just from that. Now, is that from actual growth? No, but that will lead to growth because of the stimulus. So anytime that you're bumping carbohydrates on a certain day, you're getting a higher insulin spike. And well, if your fats are, you know, controlled, so I will bring fats down on those days where that goes up. So I'll allow more of an insulin spike, and then it's going to shuttle more electrolytes and pull more water into the cells. So what you'll notice is that's why a person will gain a lot of scale weight on those days. It's usually not just due to the glycogen formation, but the electrolytes.
Do you guys like to use insulin on like higher refeed days? I know it's obviously situational as well, but you know, do you guys utilize it as an option on those days with certain people?
I'll do it to pull somebody out of a hole if they're like really flat or really beat down, and I feel like, or if we're in a time frame where I wanted to give like a refeed and fill them out, but we don't have a lot of time left, I will use insulin to accelerate that. Whereas I typically won't refeed with that because at that point, if you're refeeding, their glutes better be damn near showing. And if that's the case, they're probably really sensitive to begin with. And this is something people don't consider is when you're hypersensitive, that's kind of like being on insulin, like your show rebound. You're so sensitive. You eat a 50-gram of carb meal, that's like you just shot 5 IUs of Humalog. So you're going to get an insulin-like response when you're hypersensitive. So I don't know why anybody would really do that.
Well, to your point, if someone is like, they're waking up their blood sugar 62, and you're throwing 50 grams of carbs in that first meal, they actually might have a reactive hypoglycemia just because they are so insulin sensitive,
Yeah.
right? Within 20 minutes or whatever, 30 minutes after the meal, they're sweating, and they have like the sheer signs of hypoglycemia because their body is just so sensitive to the carbs. Did you have something you wanted to add, Kyle?
No, I would say the way I would utilize insulin, I do it more so to just help the natural processes, right? It's how your body's supposed to function. If the pancreas needs a little bit of support, then I'll utilize it. Let's just say you're intaking 100 grams of carbs 6-7 times a day. That's a lot, right? So at times, if I'm doing that, again, I don't have the same set diet every day to where I just take the intra out or something weird like that, to where 7 days a week is the same diet. So I always keep people's insulin sensitivity more so ideal by just doing that alone. But still, if the person is eating a lot, I'll use it in those cases just to help the body out, to where, hey, instead of the body's not recognizing this as 150 carbs, now I took care of 75, right? Something like that. So it's kind of my.
And you're doing that to help the pancreas out, to save the beta cells, right? In terms of
Absolutely.
saving the body, helping the body out.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw in a little Easter egg here because we're going to do an episode because somebody jumped into the comments and asked about what I did with James Hollingshead and insulin. And what's funny about the experiment that I did is it's very similar to what everybody's using the GLPs for now. So that's a little Easter egg. We're gonna compare the tirzepatide and the retatrutide to that experiment that I did, and we're gonna show exactly how that works for recompositioning. So again, related to insulin, that's gonna be a cool one.
Awesome. All right. I think we covered that one. Let me pull up our next question here. Okay. This one's from Matt 7000, also from YouTube a couple days ago. It would be nice if you could address some of the popular myths about bulking and cutting compounds. So, let's see. Phil, why don't you start with one? Pick your favorite, I guess. This one has this rumor. This one has this stigma attached to it, and explain why.
Where do we start? I think I see Kyle smiling. I think each one of these has their own myths that go with it. But I'll throw one of mine. People are jumping on the health train now, right? Everybody's trying to be super healthy, or they're trying to appear super healthy anyway, because we know a lot of coaches that will talk about health, and then we'll see their plan and we'll be like, no. But for the most part, a lot of people are trying to jump on the moral high ground, I'm super healthy train. Like, I never use tren in the off season. I do. I absolutely do, because it's going to make you stronger than damn near everything else you're going to take, and it's going to push your strength up. And what's going to happen is that's going to translate to, more volume work, higher rep ranges, and that's going to translate to a lot of muscle growth. As we know, you've got to get stronger. You've got to increase your performance to grow. And if I want to really spike somebody's performance, you best believe I'm going to use tren in the off season.
Yeah. Kyle, what's on your mind?
I would say people that look at MPP, DECA, the MPP has been more prevalent lately, but either could be used in either phase, cutting or bulking. Some people consider MPP and DECA primarily for off-season, trying to get as strong as possible. Things like Anadrol, for example, people think are strictly off-season, puts water on you. Reality is you can use Anadrol potentially in the peak week, right? For some individuals, they actually do very well with that. It helps load them, give them a fuller look. So that's a big myth, I'd say. What about you?
Absolutely. While we're on the oral trend, even the idea that, say, some of your DHTs like Anavar, Winstrol are only prep drugs, you throw 50 milligrams of Anavar in someone's off season, and you better believe they're going to start having better pumps in the gym. They're going to be more motivated in the gym, and that's going to lead to more muscle mass. Another one, though, that came to mind a second ago was I still get some people that I'm coaching that want to keep their metformin in, or they want to use metformin thinking it's like insulin, and it's like this magical. Yeah, it's. Remember when that was a thing? I think 15 or 12 years ago.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah, and for some reason it's stuck around, and I don't know if it's like a new wave of coaches that just learned about metformin and other glucophage agents and whatnot, and are using it that way, or they think. But it's like, let me just give you guys a spoiler: if you're running metformin with all your meals peaking for a show, you're going to be in the bathroom a lot with some gastric distress, and you're probably going to be very, very flat. Okay, it is not insulin. It is not. It's not even a glucose disposal agent. It works very differently than these agents. But that's just kind of a funny one off the top of my head. Phil, you look like you got another one.
I got a funny one.
Okay.
So I'm going to name drop here because we really don't get along and I don't care and people seem to like controversy. But back in 2018 when I was getting ready for nationals, now I don't know if you guys remember that, but like even Sean Roden messaged me and goes, bro, you were peeled out of your freaking mind. So I was ready 4 weeks out. Andrew, you saw, like I was ready.
I was there backstage with you.
Yeah.
I was there backstage with you. You were shredded.
4 weeks out, I was completely ready. So like me and Blue Taylor were friends at the time. And I don't feel bad about this because he trash talked me a lot afterwards. But so anyway, we're talking and I send him pictures and he asks me what I'm taking and I show him, I think I'm on like 25 aromas in a day or 12 and a half or something like that, very little. And, a little bit of Novadex. And he's like, you got to double the AIs and add Arimidex and add Letro. Trust me, it'll get you drier. And I'm like, dude, I'm dry. It's not a diuretic. The reason you lose water and you stay dry on AIs is because of estrogen being, damn near at zero. So now you're not holding any water, but it's not going to make you lose any extra. I'm like, dude, I can't go below zero. It's not a diuretic. So like you said, people, I think Kyle mentioned that last episode, people stacking AIs and, Novadex and all those other things. It's like, dude, you can't go below zero. Like it's crazy how much people abuse these things and actually look at them like diuretics. Now I will give him a compliment and say he does do a very good job with his clients and he does win a lot. And this just goes to show you, you cannot be that educated, but still be a pretty good coach.
Yeah, I would agree. He puts out some really good athletes.
He does, absolutely.
I think he only works with men. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Freaks only. That's his thing. All right.
What else, Andrew? What other compounds?
I mean, I guess we could probably
keep going.
We could go every compound by compound, and I'm sure we've had a funny question from an athlete or from somebody, either on a podcast or whatever. Off the top of my head, this one's always funny. Is like when I warn them, I'm like, hey, dude, like we'll run some Anadrol, we'll go 50 to 100, and usually it's like day 14 to day 16. They're like, hey, coach, I don't know what's happened. I just can't eat anymore, and it's like. Yeah, the Anadrol, and Anadrol is kind of magic. I do think it's kind of magic because you can miss like 4 meals in a day, and you wake up the next day and you're up a pound, and you miss 3 meals the next day and you're up another pound, and it's like, where is this coming from the ether, But point being is that there's a limit to how much some of these things you can take, and that's why we kind of drop them in and out. It's not like we're trying to hold secrets back or we're not trying to limit your growth. There's a reason why coaches will only use things in specific situations for a certain period of time, and that's to get the ergogenic benefit and the aesthetic benefit and then move on so you can keep on progressing.
I think people lack the knowledge, the intricate knowledge of what each individual drug does, so they make certain assumptions. Like another one is going to be Anavar is contest prep only. I use that in the off-season all the time. Why? Because it's got one of the highest acute collagen synthesis rates of anything that you can take. So what it's going to do is it's really going to strengthen your connective tissue, and that's going to end up pushing your strength through the roof. What I'll also use it for in prep is not necessarily for your look, but if I have somebody get a tweak or an injury or a strain, and you take a little bit of you take a little bit of Anavar, you're going to heal up really quick. So I'll use that to heal somebody up from injuries in prep really, really quick.
What else? I don't have any that are jumping out at the top of my head. You guys have any?
No. I don't remember if we talked about it in the last episode, if I'm being honest, the Masteron Primo train. You'll see a lot of people pushing the Masteron Primo now as kind of the anabolics that allow them to get from A to B. So I don't know what your take, Andrew. Would you like?
Seeing as we've had a big Primo Bolin shortage in particular lately, it's kind of by default had to go that way in some situations. But with me and like PEDs, I really do like athletes to write down what they feel they've had good experiences with. And if I think Primo's going to be better, but they've convinced me, and by convincing mean they've had 5 years of bodybuilding, 5 years of taking PEDs. They've tried all the different compounds. They might tell me this makes me feel this way or this gives this side effect. I'm going to listen to them because at the end of the day, we are in a service industry and we are also trying to get better. And sometimes, even if I disagree with somebody, placebo effect works.
I was going to add that.
I stole your thunder, but I mean, shit. Me and Phil were talking the other day about how some clients that we're with in person, and they just, I got to take a diazide, or I got to take a diuretic, I got to take one. So we take a fucking sugar pill, and we're like, all right, here's 25 mgs of hydrochlorothiazide. You're good. Take it. They wake up dry and they're feeling good because they think they took that diazide. It's
now
like,
all my clients are going to figure this out.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. But
I will
yeah,
placebo the hell out of people if I have to.
Well, I mean, if you feel good, you're going to look good. If you feel good and it's like when your football team gets, new jerseys, and all of a sudden there's a new pep in the step and new stadium and all that. You're like, hey, like people believe in us and we look good. We better show out now, But Kyle, get to your point about the Primo and Masteron.
Yes, I think the Primo Masteron with the newer generation has caught a lot of popularity. I think old tried and true approaches like the Equipoise, Deca, that's kind of second on the list now. So why that is, the reality is if you are a leaner individual, you take Masteron or Primobolan, cosmetically, you'll probably look quote-unquote better than you would if you were to take Deca or something like Equipoise. Now, in terms of any PED, I think it goes without saying, nothing is healthy. Right? None of this is healthy. I don't advocate taking anything. At the end of the day, I think it's stupid if you're going to not compete and you want to take a lot of different compounds. There's no place for it. But I don't think it's any safer necessarily. I think I see a lot more individuals with no hair and needing hair transplants because
That's true.
The Masteron and Primobolan, and then they're offsetting it with things like dutasteride, finasteride, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And those lead to substantial issues, right? Erectile dysfunction, things like this that are prevalent. And the thing is, people don't realize when you're taking finasteride, if you get this side effect, it doesn't just go away, right? And like that,
I've never taken it.
So if people, once you start to have issues, it doesn't just go away. Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from, social media age, people wanting to look leaner for their videos and whatnot. Other coaches kind of tricking themselves into thinking their athletes are leaner than they are or keeping them leaner than they are without actually just not feeding them so much food. Like, I mean, when I was growing up, bodybuilding was, and I'm not saying this is correct, but eat as much food as you possibly could in the off season and then diet it all down. And you might have 50 to 60 pound swings, in your younger years. I think that's good for you once to kind of see where the threshold is, but I think a lot of times coaches try to feed athletes more food than they should be, and then try to also use compounds like DHT-based compounds to try to trick themselves into thinking I'm keeping my athlete healthier, I'm keeping them leaner. It's like maybe he just doesn't need that extra 200 grams of carbs every day. There's a limit to how fast you can grow.
I think this is also due to a lot of misinformation going around. So, people listening here, a lot of them are my followers. So, that on my page, I'm doing a lot of reels ripping apart these tiny little, I call them TikTokologists, because they think that they're smart because they read a few abstracts and they've read some research and they're like 140 pounds soaking wet and they really think they know. So they're putting out these videos, and what I'm doing is I'm showing how they're misinterpreting the information. To them, now they're not doing it maliciously. To them, it makes sense, but it's incorrect, and that's what's leading people to do this. And now what I'm noticing is there's a lot of coaches or a lot of people that are building their reps and building their pages because people love drug talk, and they're talking about these individual drugs and these attributes. Like somebody said recently that Primo and Masteron does not make your hair fall out, and I'm like, what? I said this in the group. I said this in our group chat, and you guys were like, I think Kyle was like, what the fuck did he say? And I'm like, I can't believe this, but there's a lot of people. Listen, some of them are doctors, and people are like, why would a doctor be wrong? Or why would a scientist be wrong or a researcher be wrong? And these people are putting out wrong information, and people are believing it. So now they're using these things with those things in mind that aren't actually what it does.
Well, I was telling Rachel last night, we were driving home from some mini golf. I don't even know what the topic was, but we're talking about how there's no, studies, long-term studies on mass populations of PEDs. But I said, you know what? There really is. And the guys that have been in the industry coaching people for a long time, we see those trends. Yet you could say it's all just anecdotal, but it's like these things repeat themselves so much that they're not just anecdotal. it's almost a long-term, because I was saying, on average, most guys will take about the same milligrams of stuff throughout the course of their year or course of their week or however they're programming it. So we do have some controls built in. Yeah, you got your outliers, your Boston Lloyds that 4,000 milligrams and kind of throwing caution to the wind when the labs aren't looking good, which most, generally, I don't know anyone else that does that. He was the only one that really did that. But we have a good core group of people. I mean, between us, we probably coached 2,000 or 3,000 athletes at this point, and the majority of using PEDs. And we've been able to extrapolate, some good information from that, such as, the guys that are really hitting the DHTs hard, you're going balder a little faster, a little quicker.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well said.
All right, so I just want to give. I think Kyle had 2 overalls yesterday, but I want to give a shout out because I know this kid. I think he competed at a show I did like years ago, or maybe I had an athlete in the show and I got to know him. He's a really nice kid. Chaz Finnegan. His Instagram's at Chin of Chaz Finnegan, and he won the New Jersey State. Is that right, Kyle?
That is right. New Jersey
Garden
South.
State?
No, it was South Championships, NJC,
Okay.
something like that. South
How'd
Jersey
that-
Championships. Sorry, I was losing
All
my
right.
mind.
Now, how'd that go? He used to work with Stephen Metropolis, right?
He did. He worked with Stephen Metropolis, I think for, the beginning of his bodybuilding career, and then he switched gears. He prioritizes his career as well in the healthcare industry. I don't want to reveal exactly what he does, but he's got a real job, so he doesn't just sit on his thumb all day like some people unfortunately can. But very hard worker, always looking to go above and beyond, and he listens. So that is the core thing that I look for in clients, is those that listen and follow instructions to the T.
Mm-hmm.
So that was our qualifier. So we'll do it again in a few weeks, and then just make improvements.
Now, did you fully peak him for this, like a trial run, or did you kind of say like this is going to be a layup? We're just qualifying, so let's just wing it.
There's no diuretic usage, minimal water manipulation. I didn't really do anything with salt. I knew we would win, I guess you could say.
So kind of don't stress his body out and let's prepare for the big one.
Yeah, because I know we need to push a little bit. I know this is the best he's ever looked. It's his first time he ever won an overall, so he was super stoked about that. Had his family, his mother and father there in attendance. So, it's always good to get kind of a good confidence boost, as you mentioned, Andrew, earlier, especially for athletes that are amateur and they're kind of unsure about where they stack up. So I think this is a great momentum for him going into what will be Universe, good national show.
Absolutely. He's got such a great look too. He kind of like reminds me of like just a Bumstead, like light, He obviously needs the tissue, but he's got such a clean, classic look, I could see him definitely going far. But all right, guys, that's all we have for today for the Unwracked podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. Leave us questions and comments in the board. And till next time, guys, we will see ya. This is Unwracked.